The global financial system, the stability of international trade, and the actual purchasing power of your savings account are all currently balancing on a precarious $34 trillion structure of debt. To understand how we got here, we have to start with the baseline constraint of scarcity. There are simply never enough physical resources, food, land, or energy, to satisfy everyone's infinite desires at once. Humanity's initial workaround for this was trade. You have apples, I have bananas, we swap. But direct trade is inefficient, so we invented a universal medium of exchange to keep the gears spinning. We invented money. For most of modern history, a currency's value was strictly tethered to physical scarcity. The paper bills in your pocket were essentially receipts, backed by finite, heavy metals sitting securely in a vault. Today, that physical anchor is gone. Modern money, whether it's cash in a register or digits in a bank app, has zero intrinsic physical value. It operates entirely on a shared psychological belief. We accept it because we trust that the next person will accept it too. That means the US dollar's status as the world's reserve currency is not guaranteed by physical law. It holds its position strictly through the absolute ongoing trust of the global market. This chart breaks down how that trust is managed through fractional reserve banking. When you deposit money, the bank doesn't lock it away. They hold a tiny fraction in reserve and lend the rest out. But they don't hand over physical cash from a vault. They simply type numbers into a borrower's account, creating brand new digital money on the spot. Sitting above this network are the architects of the entire system, central banks. In the US, that is the Federal Reserve. Their primary lever of control is the interest rate. If they want to stimulate a sluggish economy, they lower rates, making it incredibly cheap to borrow capital. To cool things down, they raise rates, making debt expensive and slowing down investment. But sometimes they employ quantitative easing. They buy financial assets from commercial banks to pump massive volumes of newly created money into the system. Here is the mathematical trap. If you rapidly expand the number of dollars circulating in the economy, but the total amount of real-world goods stays exactly the same, prices have to go up. More money chasing the same amount of scarce stuff equals inflation. Treating the creation of digital money as a permanent fix for economic friction carries a heavy cost. It continually dilutes the currency, quietly destroying the purchasing power of the citizens relying on it. Through the massive foreign exchange market, where global currencies are actively traded against one another, international economies are tightly linked. A loss of confidence in one area can trigger a rapid international chain reaction. When a nation borrows US dollars and their local money depreciates, paying back that debt becomes mathematically impossible. In 1997, this shuttered Thailand's economy. When public faith breaks, a bank run follows. Citizens realize the math doesn't add up and desperately try to extract their wealth before it freezes. If a government attempts to solve this panic by running the printing presses even harder to cover the shortfall, they hit the terminal stage, hyperinflation. Prices climb so rapidly that the currency itself is abandoned. Look at Zimbabwe in 2008. The government's relentless printing pushed the annual inflation rate to 89.7 sextillion%. At that scale of printing, even a single bill explicitly promising $100 trillion did not hold enough value to purchase a basic lunch. A collapsed currency is not a simple matter of expensive groceries. It destroys the baseline trust required for a society to function, freezing trade and wiping out the psychological engine of the economy. This chart shows the exact trajectory of the United States national debt over time. Notice the extreme vertical climb in recent years, pushing the total obligation well past $34 trillion. This accumulation creates a compounding trap known as servicing the debt. At a certain threshold, the interest payments alone become so massive that the government must borrow new money purely to pay the interest on the money it already borrowed. And while the central bank manages the money supply, the dollar faces a secondary threat it cannot control with interest rates: severe shocks to physical supply chains. In 2021, one wedged container ship in the Suez Canal blocked 12% of all global trade, costing the world economy roughly $10 billion every single day. It showed how a single physical failure point can instantly freeze trade and cause global prices to spike. The same vulnerability applies to technology. By relying on a handful of hyper-specialized semiconductor factories in East Asia, a brief production shortage crippled industries across the West, making used cars temporarily more expensive than new ones. If a collapse in the physical supply of goods collides directly with a massive, debt-driven expansion of the money supply, the result is stagflation. Prices surge uncontrollably while economic growth simultaneously hits a brick wall. The global economy operates as a machine built on mathematics, scarcity, and trust. When those variables shift, the power of a currency shifts with them. Surviving the next cycle requires looking past the paper and mastering the brutal logic of the money supply. Imagine waking up tomorrow, checking your bank app, and seeing that your dollars are completely worthless. The world's reserve currency just blinks out. To understand how that could actually happen, we have to start with the single biggest problem in human history: scarcity. You want a house, food, and a slightly larger TV, but there isn't enough stuff for everyone to have everything. So, to solve this problem of not having enough to go around, humanity invented trade. For centuries, we traded using physical things with intrinsic value: cows, rocks, gold. If you had wealth, you could hold it. You could drop a heavy, shiny metal bar on a table. But today, our money is what's called fiat, a purely digital, abstract system where dollars are mostly just numbers typed onto a screen by a bank. Because fiat money isn't backed by physical gold anymore, it relies entirely on collective belief. It works simply because everyone agrees it works. The second enough people stop trusting those numbers on the screen, that purchasing power vanishes. Our entire global economic machine, over $100 trillion of wealth, is built right on top of this precarious psychological illusion, and maintaining that illusion takes an incredible amount of work. Most people think the money they borrow from a bank comes out of a physical vault. It doesn't. Through a system called fractional reserve banking, commercial banks create new digital money every single time they issue a loan. Take your mortgage or your car loan. That is brand new money. But commercial banks don't run the system. The ultimate architect is the central bank. In the US, that's the Federal Reserve. They hold the exclusive power to control the overall money supply and decide exactly how much capital flows through the pipes. This chart shows the relationship between real goods and the money supply. When a crisis hits, central banks use a tool called quantitative easing. They buy financial assets to artificially pump billions of dollars into the economy, simply by typing new numbers into spreadsheets. Notice how the money supply line shoots up, while physical goods stay exactly the same. When you have more dollars chasing the exact same amount of finite goods, prices rise to close the gap. This is inflation. The real value hasn't changed, but the purchasing power of your money has been diluted. If that monetary expansion spirals out of control, trust fully evaporates. In 2008, Zimbabwe's annual inflation hit nearly 90 sextillion%. You could hold a $100 trillion bill in your hand and still not be able to afford a sandwich for lunch. The power to print money is a severe double-edged sword. It allows a central bank to temporarily stimulate a struggling nation, but if mismanaged, it will completely incinerate the citizens' purchasing power. This chart visualizes the scale of the United States national debt against its economic output. The US government currently owes over $34 trillion, a number that is actively rising and visibly dwarfing the country's GDP. To maintain this structure, the government falls into a terrifying loop called servicing the debt. They have to constantly borrow new money simply to pay the interest on the money they already borrowed and spent years ago. Because the US dollar is the world's reserve currency, this domestic problem quickly becomes a global one. Through the massive foreign exchange, or forex market, where international currencies are traded, developing nations are effectively chained to American monetary policy. This creates a sovereign debt trap. When a foreign nation borrows capital in US dollars and their local currency depreciates in value, the math turns against them. Earning local money to pay back a rising dollar debt becomes mathematically impossible. We saw the human cost of this trap during the 1997 Asian financial crisis. When foreign capital fled and local currencies crashed, perfectly functional businesses and banks were forced to shut down entirely, destroying local livelihoods. The US dollar acts as a global weapon. A simple shift in interest rates in Washington can inadvertently bankrupt entire developing nations overnight by manipulating these exchange rates. The stability of this digital debt machine depends entirely on the physical world. If raw materials cannot move across borders, the financial house of cards starts to shake. We call this a supply shock. In 2021, a single container ship wedged itself sideways in the Suez Canal. That one physical blockage froze 12% of all global trade and cost the world economy roughly $10 billion every single day. When physical supplies vanish while the money supply remains expanded, a dangerous feedback loop begins. Factories stop because they lack parts, causing the economy to shrink. But because there's still a massive amount of cash chasing a tiny amount of goods, prices continue to soar. This is stagflation, a depression where the cost of living keeps rising even as the world stops moving. Central banks are currently walking a razor-thin tightrope to prevent this. They must choose between keeping interest rates high to crush inflation or lowering them to prevent credit markets from seizing into a total systemic freeze. The global market doesn't care about fairness, and it doesn't care about our feelings. It is a machine that only responds to the invisible hand of math, debt, and human desperation. Thanks for watching. If you found this breakdown useful, please like the video and subscribe to Dollar Logic USA for more in-depth economic analysis.